The RMT will be on strike again next week, and their General Secretary, Mick Lynch, has been back on the BBC. The newscast discussion was pretty wide-ranging, but we'll start with the answer on who he'd prefer out of Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss to be our next Prime Minister.
I obviously don't want either of them, but I think there's
There's
a real danger at the moment, I think, in this Tory contest. I think we've got a hard-right cast of people.
Is that a reasonable
I think these are
characterisation?
extremists. These are people that are saying we won't, virtually on the edge of saying that tax itself is abhorrent. And tax is a good thing in a progressive society. Tax is the means by which you create equality. And they are more or less saying to basically...
You must be like a Rishi Sunak man then, because he's the one saying...
Well, Rishi Sunak would get it back. I mean, they never put progressive taxes. Most of the taxes in this country are raised through VAT.
And he wants to put corporation tax up. He wants to whack the profits of the people you were just complaining about.
Because what you can do about corporation tax, if you want to avoid it, you can reinvest in your workforce and through research and development and retooling your company and creating more workers. That's the whole point of a corporation tax. That you avoid it through a progressive means by saying, I'm going to get loads of apprentices, I'm going to bring in a more diverse workforce, I'm going to create job opportunities. Because then it hits your profits and you only pay tax on the profit.
The thing is that, I mean, you caricature this race as being one where tax is apparently abhorrent. I mean, tax is higher now collectively than it has been in decades and decades and decades. So is government spending by any modern comparison of any political party. That's the sort of thing you'd love if it was delivered by a Labour government.
Tax needs to be high. But what we've got in this country, and this is never remarked on by the media, even yourselves, those of us that are on PAYE cannot avoid tax. We pay it out of our wages every week. There are many, many people in this country avoiding tax like it's some kind of disease.
That was Mick Lynch once again saying something no one else is willing to. Tax is good. It's what gives us decent public services. It's not something that we should try and minimise as much as possible as a society. He also points out that it matters where taxes come from. For example, VAT isn't progressive. It means that poorer people end up spending a large proportion of their income on VAT than richer people do. Income tax and corporation tax is. We're going to talk a bit more about corporation tax in one moment. And we've got another clip from Lynch. First, though, Aaron, it's good to see him back, isn't it?
It's very good to see him back, Michael. I mean, we had a short recess period. I think it was extenuated by the fact that he was embarrassing these people a little bit too much. So like, look, just only have him on when we absolutely have to. So, and I believe also maybe he had COVID briefly when we saw Eddie Dempsey sort of filling in for him a week ago. And he did very well, Eddie Dempsey. Just incredibly articulate logic and arguments for progressive policy that you don't see from Big House London pundits or from Labour politicians, really. Incredible lucidity. I tweeted earlier, isn't it remarkable? This is a guy who's left school at 16 to become an electrician, and he's showing far greater political literacy and persuasion and power of argument and cogency than three really well-paid BBC journalists. One comment was, why are you putting down people who left school? Not at all. He's better than those guys at political analysis, at communications. He's also an electrician to boot, which I'm pretty sure, I might be wrong, but I doubt, Chris Mason, Laura Koonsberg can screw in a light bulb or do anything more than that, change a plug. So it is interesting. I think it's as well it's a really powerful, good thing that the British working class is now associating progressive ideas and values with a guy that looks and sounds like Mick Lynch. I think that's fantastic. We need more of that. For too long, ideas of sort of left-wing socialist or radical social democratic policy and politics have been associated with younger university graduates, and with, I think, a little bit of justification. But the reality is there's a huge movement in this country, the Labour movement, which believes in the power of working people and believes that fundamentally the fruits of our labour belong to the people who work. So not renters, landlords rather, not to profiteers, not to bosses. So it's great to see him. I think he's a great avatar for socialism and trade unionism in the 21st century. Long may it continue.
I couldn't agree more. And I think actually the journalists have kind of learned that you don't try and destroy this guy and put him in a corner, because it was a softer interview than ones we've seen before. And I think that's because one, it's a sort of more informal podcast, but also I think they know if you give that guy shit, you're going to end up looking like an idiot. As you saw in that interview, a myth has emerged that because Rishi Sunak wants to raise corporation tax, he's secretly left-wing. He's secretly a socialist chancellor. Now, that to me just shows how far British politics has shifted to the right, especially in the past 12 years. To see why, we can look at corporation tax rates over time in the UK. In the early 80s, they were over 50% of profits. Thatcher reduced the rate to 35%. Then New Labour dropped it to 30%. And it was after 2008 that it started tumbling again. When Cameron and Osborne came to power in 2010, corporation tax was at 28%. It's now at 19%. For his part, Sunak's plan is to raise it to 25%, still a historically tiny figure, and tiny when compared to the rest of the G7. It's very, very low. Yet that position sees him called a socialist in right-wing modern Britain. It's incredibly depressing. The most moderate policies get called socialist. No wonder Jeremy Corbyn got destroyed. You got a Tory Chancellor who wants to raise corporation tax to a level that's still lower than at any time in history before 2010. And yeah, he's going to get beaten by Liz Truss because she wants to cut taxes even more. Very depressing. Let's watch some more Mick Lynch to cheer us up.
Is there something you've had to stop doing in your life? Because even though you know it's legit, if it got papped and put in the mail, you know that they would misinterpret it and it would harm your cause.
Well, you'll be pleased to know that I've got the most boring regulation life. I'm a very traditional person. And I happen to have, traditional trade union, old Labour type politics. Now, maybe I'm just exceptional because that sort of thing has died out. But I'm hoping to articulate the case on behalf of a bit of fundamental redistribution of wealth and a square deal for working people. I think people have lost a lot of values. And I think the job of the trade unions at the minute is to re-establish some values about things like commonwealth, things like, and I mean the real meaning of commonwealth, things like shared values, shared economy, that the economy itself has got to be shared.
That's the argument your movement's lost, though, isn't it?
It has lost it, but it stopped pursuing it because it lost it in the short term in the late 70s and early 80s, but it's never gone back to it. It's been afraid of itself. Conservatism isn't afraid of its traditional values. And if you take this government now and the candidates, who I think are extreme right-wingers, they would not hesitate to jump on a bit of jingoism and nationalism and anti-migrant feeling, and they do it all of the time. And they would ride that wave as like surfers. What Starmer and others on the front bench have got to do is ride some kind of solidarity wave. And we've got to have a summer of solidarity, I think, about just the word redistribution of wealth. Wealth in this country is too polarised. All right, and there are too many people really struggling.
Remarkably simple, but remarkably effective. We need to talk more about the redistribution of wealth in this country because inequality is out of control. Aaron, will that serve as a wake-up call to Keir Starmer?
I doubt it, Michael. I don't think Keir Starmer is again one of those clever clogs that doesn't, genuinely doesn't think he's wrong, and I think he lacks quite strong self-reflection capacities. I think if over a period of time, over a year, if Mick Lynch, was this sort of iconic figure and people were sort of taking the mickey out of Keir Starmer in the media saying, why can't you be more like Mick Lynch? Yeah, maybe. But for now, no, that's not his style. That's not the style of the people around him. The thing on corporation tax, which I just find remarkable, Thatcher reduced corporation tax, I think in 89 or 90 to 34%. That was the lowest it was ever under Margaret Thatcher, 34%, right? Which is significantly higher than it is now. It's significantly higher than it was planned to be under Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson. And they're saying, well, the tax take now is bigger than ever before. Yeah, it's because VAT's gone up. It's because you're hammering middle income earners, right? It's like saying, well, the size of the state, all this money we're generating from student loans and all the interest we're putting onto graduates earning 30 grand a year who can't save anything to buy a house, but they can pay back their student loans. That's good, isn't it? A big state's good. No, a big state is not good if it's providing profits for shareholders in privately owned rail operators or for water companies, or if the NHS increasingly is using outsourcing, which is inefficient, but it means more money, so that means it must be good. That's more socialist, right? If you're using more inefficient outsourcing and more resources, which needs higher taxes from middle income earners, great, that's socialism, right? No, it's not socialism. And I think there's been such an absence of thoughtful pushback to that when Mick Lynch comes along and sits down with them for an hour to talk about this stuff, they're like, oh, what the hell is going on? Because remember, Michael, as many times as you or Ash or I or socialist left-wing journalists have been going into the mainstream media, particularly over the last sort of 5 years, it's very rarely been in the context of a serious policy debate. Labour would propose a policy like this, And then they viewed their job as saying, well, it's wrong, isn't it? That can't work, can it? It can have a serious, having a rate of corporation tax still lower than Japan and California, two of the most innovative economies in the world. Well, that can't work, can it? Okay. We're not dealing with serious people in legacy media. The great thing about Mick Lynch, he hits a real sweet spot, is he's hugely informative and he pars the hell out of these people, but he's doing it in a really clever way and he's not being vicious to them in their faces, which is a gift. Very, very difficult to ruin somebody's logic so fastidiously, so quickly, so effectively without seeming mean. Very, very talented man.
I agree. We've got to get him on soon.